Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second of the Continuing the Conversation webinars. This webinar is going to focus on scattering on water. For those of you that attended our previous webinar, we focused on cremation data and some other related topics, which I'll cover in a moment, just to kind of get as a refresher. But I wanted to introduce myself. For those of you that are not familiar with myself, my name is Darren. I'm the president and co-founder of Passages International business, a little over 20 years. And I'm really excited to bring some of the lessons that we've learned over the years and hopefully educate you on some of the experiences that our products can help your families create and help you remain profitable in this very fluid environment. So the last session we talked about, I'll cover again briefly in a few minutes so you can just see what the data is saying. We also talked about cremation not being the end, rather being the beginning of the conversation. I think so many funeral directors hear the word cremation or the word direct cremation and their limbs shiver and they see it as, oh, well, I'm not going to generate any revenue here. But for us, we see it as the beginning of the conversation. And there are so many options with cremation that if you are providing your families with
audio to work,
if you're providing your family with the education that they need, then I believe they will spend money on the products and services that you're offering. So we also looked at why families choose cremation and how to align with their values. And we talked about how the funeral experience has really changed and how cremation provides limitless options for families, which they really are excited about. So, obviously we've been in business 20 years, as I mentioned, and, we want to make sure that you stay informed and stay educated so that you can provide meaningful options for families. We want to help you stay relevant and meet the changing demands of families. And today we're going to focus on scattering on water and the products that you can use, what the data shows, what scattering on water looks like now and what it could look like if you were using some of the products that I'm going to show you. We're going to look at how you elevate the experience for families. We're going to look at dissolving versus biodegrading. And I think it's really important that you understand the difference so that you can advise families properly. And we're going to look at the product options for placing cremated remains in the water. Let's see. Let's see. So let's look at the data. We touched on this last time for those of you that were with us, but I think what's really important for you to understand is there's a large number of families that intend to scatter cremated remains. The NFDA did a survey back in 2019. It was a consumer preferences survey, and it found that almost 50% of families intend to scatter. I would challenge you to think about your selection rooms and look at how many urns are designed for scattering. And I'm not talking about sort of the Batesville cartridge can type urn or a cloisonne that you can screw the top off. I'm talking about something that's eco-friendly, sustainable, that will biodegrade in the ocean or is designed for scattering. What we found is there's this real disconnect between what the funeral homes are offering and what data is telling us that families want. And that leads to families leaving the funeral home with cardboard boxes or your least expensive gunmetal or MDF box, and then ultimately going online later and finding something that they can use for scattering. And so I think it's really, really important that you understand the data and understand that only 25 to 27% of families intend to keep the remains either in a place of worship, at home, or at a cemetery. I would argue that probably closer to 75% of people ultimately end up scattering. And of course, some of them may scatter at a cemetery, but I think people are looking for different experiences that are often outside of the cemetery environment. So what is scattering? Well, I mean, this sounds like very obvious, but basically scattering at its simplest is placing the remains in a location, disposing of the remains in a location. You know, there are thousands of ways to do this. I would argue that what you see on the slide right now is probably the least attractive, dignified, memorable way of doing it. And I would argue that a lot of people are doing it this way and are probably left feeling somewhat empty and like something's missing. And what I'm going to show you is some other options that you can provide to families that will help them create a much more memorable experience. By providing families with ideas and with products that will enable them to have these new types of experiences, you can open families up to purchasing and spending more money at your facility. You also end up becoming an expert and a thought leader, and really helping families cater to the needs that they're looking to get fulfilled. So I've talked about experiences, and you know, I think families are really looking for something that is outside of the tradition. I think that's one of the reasons why families choose cremation in the first place, because it's a rejection of traditional burial. And traditional burial doesn't really allow you many choices and options, or at least for the family. Yes, they can choose a casket. Yes, they can choose whether to embalm or not. Yes, they can choose who's going to officiate and when and where. But with cremation, the options are so much more limitless. And people are doing really creative, unique things. So for example, with the photograph that you see on the right side of your screen, that was a family that purchased, I think it was either 50 or 100 keepsake journey earth urns. And they invited 50 or 100 of their friends on a whale watching cruise in Maui. They all wrote on the urns individually, and then they all threw them into the ocean at the same time from this whale watching cruise. And it was very, very memorable and meaningful for both the family and the friends that attended the service. We've also had with our turtle urn, which is the one that's in the middle shot, we've had families that have purchased that from a funeral home, decorated it, placed it in the ocean, and a real turtle swam up to the turtle urn during the memorial service. And so those types of things really end up becoming very, very priceless. And families see a lot of value in them. You know, families are looking for experiences that they can participate in versus be spectators. They're looking for something that's unique and represents the life of the deceased, and something that's meaningful, memorable, and healing, and that actually gives them closure. So much, if we're not giving families ideas and options with which to dispose of the cremated remains, I feel like we're leaving them without closure. It's like embalming a body and then not going to the church and or burying at the cemetery. Just that embalming is not the end of the transaction. It's preparation of the body for the end transaction. And I would argue cremation is the same. Cremation is preparation of the deceased body for disposition, which in many cases, as you've seen by the data, is scattering. We didn't touch on this we touched on this last time, but Cana and Homesteaders did some focus groups last year, and they found that people really want to celebrate life. They hardly ever use the word funeral, and they also see very little value in the body itself. So for example, they don't see value in caskets, they don't see value in embalming, they don't see value in open caskets or viewings, because they don't want to remember a dead body at the front of a chapel. What they want to remember is, you know, sunsets on the beach, or birthday parties, or weddings, or birth of grandchildren. Those are the things that people want to remember when they're thinking about a loved one they've lost. So I'm going to show you a quick video. This, I think, is from a Michigan family that went to Maui, and they were scattering the remains off the coast of Maui. And this pod of, whoa, see if I can go back there. Okay, well, we may have to skip that, but anyway, we had a short video that was actually on YouTube, and basically this family took the cremated remains. They were scattering from kayaks and sailboats off the coast of Maui, and this pod of whales and dolphins swam by. And so you can just hear the glee and the excitement of this family while they were undertaking this scattering that they were doing off the coast of Maui. So, we've talked about why families want this, but we read frequently in places like the New York Times where families are looking to do unique things. They're looking for meaningful experiences, and they see value in these products. And if you are able to provide them or paint a picture of an experience that they can have to honor their loved one, then the product basically becomes a necessity. They can't have some of these experiences without the product. Yes, you can scatter from a plastic box, but it's not quite the same. So I want to talk about some of the products that we have available. I think most of you will see the screen. We have 7 or 8 different types of biodegradable urn, and all of these urns are designed to float and sink intact, dispersing the cremated remains underwater as water pressure forces the urns to open. There's nothing wrong with scattering the traditional way, for example, spreading the ashes. But when you're doing it over water or at sea, as many of you know, it can be windy and it can be messy. You have to make sure that you're using the right product, or the experience can be ruined for the family. One of the main ways that you can ruin the experience is if you use an urn that's not designed to go in the water, and consequently it either sinks like a rock or it floats for an extended period of time. And the floating is a really big issue that I'll talk about in a few minutes, but you want an urn that's going to float briefly, long enough to sing a song, read a poem, scatter some petals, that type of thing, but you don't want it floating for an hour. Because you never know, someone might be in a charter, they might be using it on a charter, they might be on their own vessel and there are lots of other vessels around, or there's a storm coming in. So they want to see the actual urn sink, and that gives them the closure. So to talk specifically about some of the urns that we have available, we have 2 different kinds of urns that are designed for water burial. One of them I would describe as biodegradable, meaning it is not a dissolving product, rather it breaks down naturally over time, and it should be used in large bodies of water, not from the beach, not from the pier. You need to go like 3 nautical miles offshore to use these products. The reason for that is because they are not dissolving, they break down naturally over time, like any other organic material, such as a leaf when it falls in the water. All of our urns that are designed for water burial come with a water-soluble plastic bag that dissolve in less than 2 minutes in water. So once the urn opens, as I mentioned, or once water gets into the urn, the water-soluble bag is going to dissolve in 2 minutes and disperse the cremated remains. The water-soluble bags that we use were first used in a hospital environment where, nurses would or orderlies would strip beds, put the bedding into these bags, and then the whole bag would go in the laundry, meaning that they don't have to touch the soiled bedding multiple times. So to specifically talk about some of the urns on the left are called the Journey Earth urn. We have 12 different designs of Journey at the moment. We're actually introducing 8 more designs. It's very, very popular, and it's actually made of handmade paper. And the paper is made from the bark of the mulberry tree, which exfoliates naturally. We don't cut the tree down. The tree continues to grow. We basically harvest the bark. It's an ancient technique of making paper, and it's done by hand. The paper is literally dried in the sun. And so it's a really beautiful product. It has a great feel when you touch it. You can also engrave these products. And it's probably one of the least expensive products that we have for water burial. Again, designed to sink intact and biodegrade naturally over time. We also have paper mache type products, which the turtle and the serenity urn are, which are the ones in the middle. And they're made in North America. They have holes in the bottom. In fact, I have one here. It has holes in the bottom and the top beneath this, for those of you that can see. And again, designed to float briefly and then sink. That comes in multiple colors. It comes in a lotus design, and the turtle also comes in mini designs as well. We also have urns made from molded paper, which are the two on the right. We have our shell urn and we have our memento urn series. Both of those are made from recycled pre-consumer waste. We actually source the paper from a company that makes Dixie cups, and the cutouts that's left, we use that paper, we combine it with a newsprint, and we cast it in molds. And again, this is used on vintage molds, very handmade process, and we actually paint and package those products right here in Albuquerque. The shell urn actually has holes in the bottom and holes in the top, and it's designed to be placed in the water with the bottom facing down. Water will enter the urn, displace air out of the holes in the top, and it'll sink. And those have been very, very popular as well. The other types of urn we have are more dissolving. I would describe them as dissolving. And dissolving for me refers to quickly, so like a sugar cube in your coffee. These urns will dissolve in less than 3 or 4 hours when they're placed in moving water. They also come with the biodegradable bags that I mentioned before. These can be used in smaller bodies of water, like a lake or a river, because they do dissolve very quickly. Unlike the others, which I mentioned, break down naturally over time. The salt urns are literally turned on a lathe. They're from Himalayan rock salt. The salt deposits in the area of the Himalayas where we source these urns are more than 2,000 years old, very, very pure. And as you can see from the picture, they vary considerably in finish. We don't add any finish to these. This is literally how it comes out of the ground. And so some of them have a very reddish pink, orange color. Some of them are very, very light, and we really can't control that. Natural cracking, natural inconsistencies are very typical with these products. Again, these urns tend to be very heavy. They're kind of like marbles, so they can weigh 10 to 15 pounds, and they tend to sink quicker than a lot of the other urns that we have because they weigh so much. The sand and gelatin urns, which are shown on the right-hand side, those are basically an unfired clay or partially fired clay product, and they also biodegrade very quickly. We have multiple designs of this product. Many of them come in multiple sizes and colors. They close in a very unique way. You can just wet the rim of the lid and the urn will seal itself shut. With the salt urns, you would need like a eco-friendly wood glue or paper glue and allow it to dry, and that'll seal that lid. I'm gonna play you this video that shows, hopefully this one will play, that shows a time lapse of a salt urn dissolving in a fish tank. It's a little deceptive. I think if there was more movement in the water, you'd see this going much, much quicker. But I wanted to mention while we're watching this video, how important float times are. You know, a lot of people ask, well, can I use this? You know, all of these urns are biodegradable. Can I use them in the water? Well, we specifically design urns to go in the water. And one of the main reasons, one of the main differences is how long they take to sink. So, you know, we have multiple urns like the Journey Earth Urn, which are made from the handmade paper, but only the Journey Earth Urn is designed to go in the water. And the reason for that is because it floats briefly and then sinks. Some of the other urns are made of the same material. They're just as biodegradable, but they tend to be airtight and potentially could float for several hours. And we definitely don't want that. You know, we don't want an urn floating up on the beach. What I would say about all of the urns that we have that are designed for water burial is that they're that once you've placed them in the water, even the biodegradable ones that are made from paper, within several hours, you would not recognize what you put in the water. They'll become very waterlogged, saturated, and they'll start breaking into large pieces. So it's very, very rare. We've never had a situation of this where, you know, someone's picked the urn off the beach, because within a few hours, even minutes, potentially, it will break into pieces. We also don't talk about floating times. And the reason for that is because we don't know the amount of cremated remains. Obviously, the time an urn takes to sink is really dependent on how heavy the cremated remains in the urn are, or how heavy the urn itself is. So, you know, typically we're designing urns that are going to float for 3, 5, 10 minutes, something in that range. We don't want them to sink immediately, but we also don't want them floating out there for an hour. Of course, you know, the float times and the dissolving times are really going to vary from product to product. Float times are also going to vary based on local weather conditions and whether or not instructions were followed. So for example, with the shell urn that we provide, one of the instructions is that you should briefly submerge it, literally just dunk it briefly before you let it out to sea. The reason for that is on the inside of the urn, we have a water-soluble layer of plastic. And if water does not get into, especially the top of the urn, then the plastic will not break down and air will not be allowed out of the urn. And if there's air left in the urn, it'll cause the urn to float, which again, we don't want that. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I wanted to just touch on this slide really quickly. You can see that, you know, Himalayan rock salt and sand and gelatins on this graph will take less than a day. In fact, it's usually 4 or 5 hours before these dissolve completely and there'll be nothing left. And as I said, the mulberry tree, the mulberry bark, the recycled paper, and the paper mache, they take longer, but they would not be recognizable as what you put in the water if you tried to retrieve them from the water, even within an hour or two. They'll become completely waterlogged and will break up as you try to handle them. So we're at about 22 minutes. That basically concludes my webinar. I wanted to keep these within 20 to 25 minutes so that we don't take a lot of your time. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you felt the presentation was informative, please share it with any colleagues. I believe we'll be emailing out a recorded version of this. You can also, we invite you to follow us on social media, on Twitter, Facebook. You can email us at info@Passages International or sales@Passages International, or you can email me. And then we are scheduling another webinar for September 3rd, and we're going to focus on our scattering tube. So this, obviously this webinar focused on urns that you place in the water and biodegrade. The next webinar will focus on our scattering tubes, how to sell them, what the benefits of those products are, and the choices that you have available. So I'd like to take a few minutes and just thank you very much for joining our presentation today. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them, or you can email us or call the office. We're more than happy to help you train your staff if you need more education or answer any questions that you have. So thank you very much. And I'm not sure if we have any other questions. I'll give it a minute or two in case you do, and then we'll sign off.